Social Security, even though the party itself opposed it, calling it socialism. I can remember when Medicare and Medicaid came through, the Republicans called it socialism, the AMA called it socialized medicine, but enough Republicans were willing to vote for it. It got some Republican votes. And again, this was in the wake of Johnson's big victory in 1964 and big Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate. So those bills had some Republican support.
So were these senators and congressmen at that point voting their own district's interest to get their people out of the Depression, regardless of what the party line was, so to speak?
I suspect that was so. Now, you'd have to study that more carefully. You'd have to know who the votes were. But I suspect that was probably right.
Because it seems as if these consensi could not have occurred certainly today, we don't.
Well, I think there's another point, and again, historians of the Senate could speak to this more knowingly. But it's my impression that over the years that filibusters were used fairly rarely. They were used, as I said, by Southern Democrats to block civil rights bills. I don't have a recollection of filibusters being used all that frequent. In fact, the statistics show that. They've been used much more in recent years when, as you said, it was easier to do it. Because you could pass over you could yield to someone else instead of having to be on the floor at the same time. But, I guess I would say it was probably a convention of the Senate that filibuster was not to be used lightly. I mean, I don't recall until more recent years where it was said you need 60 votes to pass something in the Senate. Also, I think that our political parties have become much more polarized. As I say, we used to talk about moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats. We still have conservative Democrats, but not so many moderate Republicans.
Thank you.
You made a point you said earlier about Clinton's time of black workers. Later, I thought of the analogy. Republicans do a really good job of nominating people as representatives that's sort of an anti-representative. Clarence Thomas with African Americans, Sarah Palin with women, and also just the lack of experience or credentials altogether. It sort of seems a bit interesting, the choices that they put up for some of these positions. I find when they're minorities like. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you: Republicans not infrequently nominate African American candidates for elective office, but they virtually never win. So they nominate them in losing battles. They don't nominate them for safe seats. Think about that.
How badly broken does the system have to get? I'm thinking of federal judicial nominees, of which there are some 150 vacancies pending right now, and they've approved to date 7. If you simply don't block all nominations, these conventions are moving in terms of what the Senate is or is not willing to do. And I'm wondering at what point there are going to be 250 vacant federal judiciary seats with a Senate that's completely unwilling to nominate or approve the nominations of anybody. We're not far from that, and it's been getting worse. The trend is definitely down. I'm thinking to come back to this point about what happens if one senator decides, that's it, I'm going to make it 60 votes for everybody. Again, we're not that far from it. What happens? Well,
one of the reasons why the nominations have not been approved is that the leaders in Congress and the President haven't been pushing them. There are the and more. I think more have been filled, but they're not pushing the issue. Eventually, they'll get filled. And the Democrats did. When the Democrats controlled the Senate, they approved most of the Bush nominations. When the Republicans controlled the Senate, they approved most of the Clinton nominations. Part of it depends on how aggressively the President and the leaders of Congress do it. But I couldn't picture any senator putting a hold on every nomination. I think part of the delay is due to the fact that the Obama administration has not been pushing it.
The problem seems that the rapidity with which society changes, and now it seems like it's on a very steep change curve, outruns the envisioned capacities of the system. And I wonder, and you mentioned the difficulties of changing the system. Do you think it's a danger it will become dysfunctional? You have to have or unless you have a crisis, like the depression, to have changed things?
You can't get constitutional amendments.
No, I know that. So you've got,
and
like you said about the states, 20 people in one state have 2 representatives and 20 million in another state have 2.
And so I think, the answer is, I want to borrow the term from the Brit, we muddle through. But basically, and I keep preaching this when I talk about, we have to accept our constitutional system is given. It's not going to change. And then it's a question of how we work within the framework of that 18th century constitutional system. Legislation gets passed. Somehow legislation gets passed. Vacancies get filled. It takes time, and it's not efficient. And as I say, watch the health care bill. Suppose that the Obama administration and the leaders in Congress decide there's no way that they can get this bill through. I mean, the House is not going to vote in favor of the Senate bill. Then I think you're going to see a strategy which does work. Remember, we need consensus of getting together, of putting, sort of slicing up tranches, to use the term from the banking industry, or segments of the legislation. So Bill 1 regulates insurance companies. They can't refuse to insure for pre-existing conditions. They can't cancel your insurance. They can't impose a lifetime cap. Now, that's popular. And I don't think the Republicans would oppose that. So you keep trying segments until you hit something. And I think that's the strategy that they're going to do, because that adapts to the constitutional structure, which requires a consensus.
That's not going to get 40 million people insured.
Well, let me point out, who cares? Now,
40 million people that aren't insured.
Well, how do they vote? I'm not being facetious about that. The polls show that, like all of us have good insurance. The polls show that the great majority of Americans are satisfied with their health insurance. People who don't have health insurance tend to be younger people, and that can be remedied by letting them stay on their parents' insurance for a while, or lower income people, but many of whom get Medicaid. And of course, there are always the emergency rooms. I mean, I'm not being facetious, but what we don't see is a public concern right now for all the uninsured. And it may be that during bad times, people are much more defensive. Their fear is, well, I don't want to pay more in health care costs than just to have the uninsured. I was talking to my son, who has a public relations firm in Chicago. He was a partner of David Axelrod before Axelrod had it divest. And he talks to some of the political people, though he himself is not doing that work. But he said that he saw a figure from them that 80% of the costs in the proposed bill would go toward insuring the uninsured. So if you have your health insurance, are you that worried about the uninsured? Do you want to pay? Because this is where the opponents can make all these arguments in no small part because there's no clear bill. Do you want to pay more for your health insurance to insure uninsured? Do you want to?
You're going to anyway, because the people who are not insured don't go to the doctor until they're very sick, and then their costs for remedy are much higher, and it's paid for by Medicaid.
How do you sell that politically, though? See, part of it is that